I thought love meant partnership until I realized I was doing everything while he did nothing. What happened next changed my entire perspective on relationships. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. My name is Nora, and for 3 years I believed I was living the American dream. I had a steady job as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup in Austin, Texas, a beautiful apartment that I decorated with care, and a fiancé named Derek, who seemed like everything I thought I wanted in a partner. He was charming, successful in his sales career, and had this way of making me feel special when we first started dating. But somewhere along the way, that dream became a nightmare I didn't even recognize I was living. It started gradually, like most toxic patterns do. When we moved in together 2 years ago, Derek suggested I handle the cooking since I was so good at it. I was flattered. He praised my lasagna and raved about my Sunday brunches to his friends. It felt nice to be appreciated for something I genuinely enjoyed doing. Then came the cleaning. "You're so much better at organizing than I am," he'd say with that smile that used to make my heart skip. I'd just mess it up anyway. I bought into it completely. After all, I did have a system, and I liked our home to look a certain way. The laundry followed naturally. He'd joke about shrinking my favorite sweater or mixing colors, so I took over that responsibility too. Before I knew it, I was handling every single household task while working 40 hours a week at my demanding job. But the breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. I remember it clearly because the leaves outside our apartment window were just starting to turn orange, and I had been looking forward to taking some photos during my lunch break. Instead, I spent my entire lunch hour grocery shopping because we were out of everything, and Derek had mentioned wanting his favorite stir-fry for dinner. I walked through the front door at 6:30 p.m., my arms full of grocery bags, my laptop bag cutting into my shoulder, and my feet aching from a day of back-to-back meetings. Derek was exactly where I'd left him that morning, on the couch, controller in hand, playing the latest video game he'd bought with money from his last commission check. "Hey, babe," he called without looking away from the screen. "How was your day? I'm starving. When do you think dinner will be ready?" I stood there in the doorway, grocery bags cutting off circulation to my fingers, and something inside me just cracked. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but like a hairline fracture in glass that's been under pressure for too long. "I don't know," I said quietly, setting the bags down on the kitchen counter. "When are you planning to cook it?" He paused his game then, finally turning to look at me with confusion written across his face. "What do you mean? You always cook dinner." "I always do a lot of things," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I'm tired, Derek. Really tired." He laughed, the kind of dismissive laugh that made my stomach clench. "Come on, Nora. You know I can't cook like you can. Besides, I worked all day too." That's when I noticed his gym clothes on the coffee table, the same clothes that had been there when I left for work that morning. His laptop was closed, and there were snack wrappers scattered around his gaming setup. The dishes from his breakfast were still sitting in the sink, along with the dishes from yesterday's breakfast, and the day before that. "What exactly did you do all day?" I asked, and I could hear the edge creeping into my voice. "I had client calls," he said defensively, "and I went to the gym. Just because I don't sit in an office all day doesn't mean I don't work hard." I looked around our apartment. My apartment, really, since my name was the only one on the lease. I saw the pile of his laundry on the bedroom floor that I'd somehow become responsible for. I saw the bathroom counter covered with his toiletries that never seemed to find their way back to where they belonged. I saw the kitchen that I cleaned every single morning before work, only to come home to it being messy again. "You're right," I said finally. "You do work hard. But so do I. And somehow I'm also running our entire household." Derek's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "Why are you being like this? You've never complained before." That was the moment I realized he was absolutely right. I had never complained before. I had absorbed every responsibility, every task, every bit of emotional and physical labor that came with maintaining our shared life, and I had done it with a smile. I had convinced myself it was love, that this was what partnership looked like. But looking at him sitting there, genuinely confused about why I might be upset. I understood that he didn't see me as a partner at all. He saw me as a service provider, someone who worked full-time and then came home to work another full-time job taking care of him. "You know what?" I said, walking past him toward the bedroom. "I'm not cooking dinner tonight." "What am I supposed to eat?" he called after me. I paused in the doorway and turned back to look at him. "I don't know, Derek. What did you eat before you met me?" That night, I ordered pizza for myself and ate it in the bedroom while Derek rummaged through the kitchen, complaining loudly about how there was nothing to eat in a refrigerator full of ingredients I had bought specifically for the stir-fry he'd requested. As I sat there with my slice of pepperoni pizza, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop. Not forever, necessarily, but long enough to see what would happen. Long enough to see if the man I was planning to marry would step up, or if he would reveal himself to be exactly what I was beginning to suspect he was. I was about to find out just how much of our relationship was built on my labor and his comfort. The next morning, I implemented what I privately called the experiment. I didn't announce it with fanfare or ultimatums. I simply stopped doing the things I had been doing automatically for 2 years. I got up at my usual time, showered, and got ready for work. But instead of making coffee for both of us, I made coffee for one. Instead of preparing Derek's breakfast along with mine, I grabbed a yogurt from the fridge and headed out the door. Instead of doing the dishes that had accumulated in the sink, I left them exactly where they were. Derek was still asleep when I left, which wasn't unusual. His flexible schedule meant he rarely got up before 10, while I was out the door by 8:30 every morning. The first day felt strange. At work, I kept thinking about the dishes in the sink and the unmade bed. My conditioning ran deep. I felt guilty for not taking care of things, even though taking care of them had never been my sole responsibility in the first place. When I came home that evening, the scene was exactly what I'd expected, but somehow still shocking to see. The dishes were still in the sink, but now they were joined by a cereal bowl, a coffee mug, and a plate with sandwich crumbs. Derek was back on the couch, and the apartment had that lived-in look that comes from someone going through their day without cleaning up after themselves. "Hey," he said as I walked in. "I couldn't find anything for breakfast this morning. We're out of eggs." "There were eggs in the refrigerator when I left," I replied, hanging up my coat. "Yeah, but there were only 2 left and I didn't want to use them all up." I stared at him for a moment, processing this logic. He didn't want to use the last 2 eggs, so instead he'd eaten cereal and left the empty bowl in the sink for me to deal with. This was the kind of consideration I was supposed to be grateful for. "What's for dinner?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "What are you making?" He gave me that look again, the same confused expression from the night before. "Nora, come on. You know I can't cook." "You're 28 years old, Derek. You lived on your own for 4 years before we moved in together. What did you eat then?" "That was different," he said. "I had roommates, and we all just kind of figured it out. Besides, takeout is expensive for one person, but it doesn't make sense when you're here and you're such a good cook." There it was again. The compliment wrapped around the expectation. I was a good cook. Therefore, I should cook. Never mind that being good at something doesn't automatically make it your responsibility, especially when you're also working full-time and handling every other aspect of running a household. "I'm going to take a shower," I said, instead of engaging with his dinner question. When I came out 20 minutes later, Derek was rummaging through the refrigerator with increasing frustration. "There's literally nothing to eat in here," he complained. I looked over his shoulder at the fully stocked refrigerator. There were vegetables for salads, ingredients for at least 5 different meals I had planned, leftovers from Sunday's dinner, sandwich fixings, and fruit. What there wasn't was prepared food that required no effort on his part. "There's plenty of food," I said calmly. "It just needs to be cooked. But I don't know how to make any of this stuff." "There's this amazing thing called the internet," I replied. "It has thousands of recipes and cooking videos." Derek's frustration was mounting. "Why are you being like this? This isn't like you." He was right. It wasn't like me. The old me would have already started chopping vegetables and asking what he was in the mood for. The old me would have felt guilty for his hunger and responsible for fixing it. But I was discovering that maybe the old me had been enabling something unhealthy. "I'm being exactly like me," I said. "I'm just not being like your personal chef anymore." That night, Derek ordered Thai food for himself. He offered to order something for me too, but I declined and made myself a simple pasta dish instead. As I cooked, I realized something profound. Cooking for myself felt completely different than cooking because it was expected of me. When it was my choice, it was relaxing, creative, enjoyable. When it was my obligation, it had become a chore that drained my energy and built resentment. The real test came over the weekend. Saturdays had become my marathon cleaning days. I would spend hours washing dishes, doing laundry, vacuuming, scrubbing bathrooms, and organizing all the things that accumulated during the week. Derek would occasionally help if asked directly, but his help came with sighs and half-hearted effort that somehow made more work for me. This Saturday, I slept in. I made myself coffee and sat on the balcony reading a book I'd been trying to finish for months. Derek emerged around 11, looked around the apartment with growing alarm, and asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Aren't you going to clean today?" "Nope," I said without looking up from my book. "But the apartment is a mess." "Then you should probably clean it." "Nora, you know I don't know how to clean like you do." I finally looked up from my book and really studied his face. He wasn't joking. He genuinely believed that there was some special skill involved in putting dishes in the dishwasher, wiping down counters, and putting things back where they belonged. "Derek," I said slowly, "cleaning isn't a talent. It's not something you're born knowing how to do. It's basic life maintenance that every adult should be capable of. But you're so much better at it. I'm better at it because I do it every single day. You're not worse at it because you lack some innate ability. You're worse at it because you've chosen not to learn." The conversation that followed was revealing in ways I hadn't expected. Derek wasn't lazy, exactly. He worked hard at his job, he maintained his car, he managed his finances. But somewhere along the way, he had decided that household management was women's work, and he had found a woman willing to do it for him. The most infuriating part was that he didn't even recognize it as work. In his mind, I was just naturally better at domestic tasks, naturally more nurturing, naturally more organized. It didn't occur to him that I had learned these skills out of necessity and that I was tired of being the only one responsible for them. By Sunday evening, our apartment looked like a tornado had hit it. Derek had managed to generate an impressive amount of mess in just 2 days, and his discomfort with the chaos was becoming increasingly obvious. "This is ridiculous," he finally said. "We can't live like this." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "We can't." I saw hope flicker in his eyes, thinking I was about to cave and return to my usual routine. Instead, I said, "So, what's your plan to fix it?" Week 2 of the experiment brought revelations I hadn't anticipated. Derek's initial confusion had evolved into frustration, then anger, and finally into something that looked almost like panic. Our apartment had devolved into a state that would have horrified me a month earlier, but I was discovering something important about myself. I could live with temporary mess if it meant not being the only one responsible for preventing it. The turning point came on a Wednesday evening. I walked into our kitchen to find Derek standing in front of the open refrigerator, a look of genuine distress on his face. "Nora, we have a problem," he said seriously. "I think the milk has gone bad." I walked over and looked into the refrigerator. The milk carton was exactly where it had been for the past 5 days. And yes, it had definitely gone bad. But what struck me wasn't the spoiled milk. It was Derek's phrasing. We had a problem. Not he had a problem because he'd been drinking milk without checking the expiration date. Not he had a problem because he'd never learned to grocery shop or meal plan. We had a problem because in his mind, household management was still a shared responsibility, even though he'd never actually shared it. "You're right," I said. "You do have a problem. What am I supposed to put on my cereal?" "I don't know, Derek. What do you think people usually do when they run out of milk?" He stared at me as if I'd asked him to solve advanced calculus. Go to the store? That's one option. But I don't know what kind you like. I had been buying the same brand of milk for 2 years. It was written on our shared grocery list, which hung on the refrigerator door, and which I updated weekly with items we needed. But Derek had never looked at that list, never contributed to it, and apparently never noticed what brand of anything we used in our home. "Derek," I said gently, "do you know what kind of bread I buy?" He looked uncertain. "The healthy kind? Do you know what brand of coffee I drink every single morning? Starbucks? Do you know what size tampons I use? What laundry detergent doesn't make me break out in a rash? What temperature I like the apartment at night?" With each question, his face grew more uncomfortable. These weren't trick questions or intimate details. They were basic facts about the person he'd been living with for 2 years and had planned to marry. "I don't understand what this has to do with milk," he said defensively. "It has to do with partnership," I replied. "I know that you prefer your coffee black, that you like the temperature at exactly 72 degrees, that you break out in hives if we use fabric softener with fragrance. I know these things because I pay attention to your needs and preferences. I plan around them. I shop with them in mind." Derek was quiet for a long moment. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that for 2 years I've been managing our entire household while you've been living in it like a guest at a hotel. And I'm tired." That conversation opened a floodgate. Over the next few days, Derek began to notice things he'd never seen before. He noticed that toilet paper didn't magically appear in the bathroom. He noticed that clean clothes didn't automatically show up in his dresser. He noticed that groceries cost money and required planning and time to purchase. But instead of stepping up, his first instinct was to negotiate. "What if we hired a cleaning service?" he suggested. "With what money? And why should we pay someone to do something we're both capable of doing ourselves? What if I ordered groceries online? Then you wouldn't have to go to the store. But I'd still be meal planning, making the list, and putting everything away when it arrives. What if we ate out more? That's expensive and unhealthy, and it doesn't solve the problem of you not participating in running our household." Each suggestion revealed the same underlying issue. Derek was willing to throw money at the problem or find workarounds, but he wasn't willing to actually learn and share the responsibilities that came with adult life. The crisis came on Friday night. We were supposed to have dinner with his parents on Saturday, and Derek had promised his mother that I would bring my famous apple pie. I had completely forgotten about it, and more importantly, I wasn't planning to make it. "Nora, we need to go to the store and get ingredients for the pie," Derek said as I walked in from work. "No, we don't," I replied. "What do you mean? I told my mom you were bringing it." "Then you need to call your mom and tell her you made a mistake." Derek's face went through several emotions at once. "But she's counting on it. She already told everyone you were bringing your apple pie." "Derek, when did you tell her I was bringing a pie?" "Last weekend, when she called." "Did you ask me if I wanted to make a pie before you volunteered me?" He was quiet. "Did you ask if I had time to make a pie? Did you offer to help make it? Did you even check if we had the ingredients?" I thought, you thought that I would handle it, like I handle everything else." This was the moment I realized the full extent of the problem. Derek hadn't just been taking advantage of my willingness to manage our household. He'd been volunteering my labor to other people without even consulting me. In his mind, my time and energy were resources he could freely allocate. "What am I supposed to tell my parents?" he asked. "Tell them the truth. Tell them that you offered something without checking with me first, and that I won't be bringing a pie. But that makes me look like an idiot." "Derek, that's because what you did was idiotic." He called his mother that night, and I could hear his side of the conversation from the bedroom. He didn't tell her the truth. Instead, he told her I was sick and wouldn't be able to make the pie. When he hung up, he looked at me with resentment. "Thanks a lot. Now my mom thinks you're flaky." "Your mom thinks I'm sick because that's what you told her. You could have told her the truth." "What truth?" "That my fiancé is going through some kind of phase where she won't cook or clean." The word phase hit me like a slap. A phase. As if my exhaustion, my resentment, My desire for an equal partnership was just a temporary mood swing that would pass if he waited it out. Derek, I said quietly, this isn't a phase. This is me realizing that I don't want to marry someone who sees me as a live-in housekeeper who also brings in a paycheck. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you did a load of laundry? When was the last time you planned a meal? When was the last time you cleaned a bathroom or vacuumed a floor or noticed that we were running low on something before we completely ran out? He couldn't answer because the answer was never. In 2 years of living together, Derek had never once taken initiative on any household task. He'd helped when asked, sometimes, but he'd never seen the needs and addressed them independently. This is who I am, Nora. I can't just change overnight. I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm asking you to start. I'm asking you to see this relationship as a partnership instead of a service arrangement. But what if I mess up? What if I shrink your clothes or break the vacuum or buy the wrong groceries? Then you'll learn from the mistake and do better next time, like every other adult on the planet. That night, Derek slept on the couch. Not because I kicked him out of the bedroom, but because he chose to. I think he was hoping I would feel guilty and come apologize, convince him to come back to bed, promise to make the apple pie and return to our old routine. Instead, I slept better than I had in months. The 4th week of the experiment brought unexpected clarity. Derek had finally started doing some household tasks, but his approach revealed everything I needed to know about our relationship's future. He did the dishes once, then left them to drain for 3 days, expecting praise for the washing, and apparently not realizing that putting them away was part of the process. He bought groceries, but only items from a list I'd written, and he texted me 6 times from the store asking about brands and sizes for things he'd been eating for 2 years. He attempted to do laundry and somehow managed to turn several of my white work shirts pink, then genuinely seemed surprised when I wasn't grateful for his effort. But it wasn't his mistakes that bothered me. Everyone makes mistakes when learning something new. It was his attitude. Every task was performed with the air of someone doing an enormous favor. He sighed heavily while loading the dishwasher. He complained about how long grocery shopping took. He wanted recognition and appreciation for doing basic adult responsibilities that I'd been handling silently for years. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning. I was drinking coffee on the balcony when Derek approached me with what he clearly thought was a reasonable solution. "I've been thinking," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Maybe we need to be more organized about this stuff." "Okay," I said, curious to hear his proposal. "I made a list of all the household stuff that needs to be done, and I think we should split it 50-50. That's fair, right?" He handed me a piece of paper with 2 columns, Derek's jobs and Nora's jobs. I scanned the list and felt my heart sink. Derek's jobs included taking out the trash once a week, mowing the small patch of grass behind our apartment building once a month, and changing light bulbs as needed. Nora's jobs included everything else. All cooking, all grocery shopping, all cleaning, all laundry, all organizing, all meal planning, and something he'd labeled as household management, which apparently meant keeping track of everything that needed to be done, and reminding him to do his 3 assigned tasks. "Derek," I said slowly, "this isn't 50-50. "What do you mean?" I counted the items. There are 12 things on your list and 12 things on mine. Taking out the trash takes 5 minutes once a week. Grocery shopping, meal planning, and cooking takes hours every single day. He looked genuinely confused. "But you're good at that stuff." "That's not the point. The point is that you've assigned yourself the 3 easiest, most infrequent tasks and left me with all the daily, time-consuming work." "Fine," he said, clearly frustrated. "What do you want me to do?" "I'm trying here, Nora. I want you to understand that running a household isn't about checking items off a list. It's about seeing what needs to be done and doing it. It's about taking equal responsibility for our shared life. But I don't see things the way you do. I don't notice when the kitchen needs to be wiped down or when we're running low on shampoo. Derek, you're an adult. You manage complex client relationships and sales strategies at work. You can learn to notice when milk is expired or when the bathroom needs cleaning. That's different. That's my job. And this is your home. This is your life too. We sat in silence for a few minutes, and I could see Derek processing what I'd said. Finally, he spoke. I don't understand why this is suddenly such a big deal. We've been living like this for 2 years and everything was fine. Everything was fine for you, I corrected. I've been drowning for months, but I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to be seen as nagging or demanding. So what happens now? Are we just going to live in chaos forever? I looked at this man I'd thought I wanted to marry, and I realized we'd been having completely different conversations for weeks. He saw this as a temporary inconvenience, a problem to be solved so we could return to the status quo. I saw it as a fundamental incompatibility that needed to be addressed before we could move forward. Derek, do you actually want to share household responsibilities? Or do you just want me to stop being upset about doing them all myself? The question hung in the air between us. I could see him struggling with it, and I realized that this might be the first time he'd really examined his own motivations. I want you to be happy, he said finally. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I guess I liked things the way they were. It worked for us. It worked for you, I said gently. I was miserable. That afternoon, Derek went to his friend's house to watch football, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I spent the day deep cleaning the apartment, not because I felt obligated to, but because I needed the meditative repetition of familiar tasks while I processed everything that had happened over the past month. As I worked, I realized that the experiment had taught me something crucial. I didn't just want a partner who would help with household tasks when asked. I wanted a partner who would see our shared life as his responsibility, too. I wanted someone who would notice when I was overwhelmed and step in without being asked. I wanted someone who valued my time and energy as much as his own. Derek wasn't that person. He might learn to be, with time and effort and genuine commitment to change. But he wasn't that person now. And more importantly, he didn't seem to want to become that person. He wanted to find ways to make me stop complaining about the inequality in our relationship, not ways to actually address the inequality itself. When Derek came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea. Hey, he said, settling into the chair across from me. I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. Okay. I talked to my friend Mike about it. He says all couples go through this stuff, and that maybe we should try couples counseling. What did you tell Mike about our situation? Just that you've been stressed about household stuff and that we're trying to figure out how to make it work better. I nodded slowly. Even in describing our conflict to his friend, Derek had framed it as my stress, my problem that we needed to solve together, not as his lack of participation in our shared life. Derek, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. If we broke up tomorrow, what would you do differently in your next relationship? He looked startled by the question. What do you mean? I mean, what have you learned from this experience? How would you approach household responsibilities with someone new? Derek was quiet for a long time, and I could see him really thinking about it. Finally, he said, I guess I'd try to find someone who didn't mind doing that stuff as much as you do. There it was. The truth I'd been afraid to hear but needed to know. Derek hadn't learned that he needed to be a more equal partner. He'd learned that he needed to find a partner who would be happy being unequal. Derek, I said softly, I think we want different things. What do you mean? I want a partnership where we both take responsibility for our shared life. You want a relationship where household management is handled by someone else, so you don't have to think about it. But I've been trying to help more. You've been trying to help when I've made it impossible for you not to. But helping isn't the same as taking responsibility. We talked until almost midnight, and it became clear that we were at an impasse. Derek genuinely couldn't understand why I wasn't satisfied with his offers to help more around the house. I couldn't make him understand that I didn't want a helper. I wanted a partner. The next morning, I called off work and spent the day looking at apartments. Not because I was angry or trying to punish Derek, but because I had finally understood something important about myself. I would rather be alone than be in a relationship where I felt alone. That evening, I told Derek I was moving out. But we're engaged, he said. as if that fact alone should override everything we'd discovered about our incompatibility. "We're engaged to people who don't actually exist," I replied. "You're engaged to someone who's happy being your personal assistant. I'm engaged to someone who wants to be my equal partner. Neither of those people is sitting in this room right now." Derek tried to negotiate, to promise he'd change, to suggest we could work it out with time and effort. But I had spent a month watching him respond to clear communication about my needs, and his response had shown me everything I needed to know about our future together. 3 weeks later, I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It was tiny compared to the place Derek and I had shared, but it felt enormous with possibility. I cooked elaborate meals for myself on weeknight evenings, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I kept the place exactly as clean as I wanted it to be, no more and no less. I discovered what it felt like to come home to a space that was truly mine. Derek texted me occasionally over the following months. He'd found a new girlfriend relatively quickly, and from what I could gather from his social media posts, she seemed happy to take on the role I'd abandoned. I felt no jealousy, only relief that we'd both found what we were looking for. 6 months after the experiment began, I started dating again. But this time, I knew what questions to ask and what red flags to watch for. I knew the difference between someone who wanted a partner and someone who wanted a service provider. Most importantly, I knew what I was worth, and I wasn't willing to settle for less. Looking back, I realized that those 4 weeks when I stopped cooking and cleaning weren't really about household chores at all. They were about discovering my own value and learning to advocate for what I needed in a relationship. Derek wasn't a bad person, but he wasn't the right person for me. And I wasn't the right person for him either. At least not the version of me who had finally learned to expect equality in love. The woman who had absorbed all those responsibilities out of fear of being seen as difficult was gone. In her place was someone who understood that real love doesn't require you to shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. Real love grows when both people show up fully, contributing equally to the life they're building together. I never did make Derek that apple pie, but I've made dozens of them since, for friends and family, and sometimes just for myself. And every time I do, I remember the moment I chose my own happiness over someone else's comfort, and I know I made the right choice.